Thank you for joining us on the Perioperative Playbook, a Sullivan Healthcare Consulting podcast. Today, our guest is Randy Heiser, our company president, and our topic is the metrics that matter in your ORs, your surgical suites, and your ASCs. My name is Stephen Spake. I have a background as a combat medic, a master's in epidemiology, and an MBA. Through all of which, I have become a giant data nerd, which dates back to my love of mathematics all the way to probably the fifth or sixth grade. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because it's near and dear to my heart. I'd love to introduce Randy Heiser for his second episode with us. Randy, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of my all-time loves, and that's data. As you know, I have a master's degree in statistics, and there is nothing that I love more than a giant wall full of numbers. So thank you for the topic.
Absolutely. I knew you'd be a fan when I brought it up. And just to give a little background on this, my absolute interest in data really comes from baseball. I'm not a baseball fan at all. I've never played baseball. But in the 80s, this branch of math called sabermetrics got introduced to the world. And it's really what evolved into the Moneyball concept. And it has since branched out all the way into, fantasy sports, big fantasy football fans. So statistics and data really serve at the fundamental baseline of that thought process. And I get really interested in taking the fundamentals of data and data observation and applying it to something that's so relevant to what we do on a daily basis in surgical services. And I'd really just like to start this by saying, in your opinion, Randy, when we start to talk about the metrics that matter in perioperative services, what are some of the big ones to you?
Well, there's quite a few, and I'll be talking about all of them. But the holy grail of surgical operations has always been, give me one number that tells me how well I'm doing. Everybody wants one number. For inpatient units, it's occupancy. For utilization review, it's average length of stay. For labs, it's cap units. Everybody's got a number that they can use that says, this will give you a really good picture of how we're doing. Surgery, one number just doesn't exist. It never has. For years, everybody talked about utilization. We want utilization to be 80% or whatever the number is. Nobody really stopped to say, first of all, utilization of what? I mean, we've got a client right now, they have 12 rooms, 12 operating rooms, plus 4 rooms in another site. And so they have a total of 16 rooms, but yet they only staff 8 or 9. So do we look at utilization of 16 rooms or do we look at utilization of 9 rooms? Nobody ever talks about utilization of what. The first thing that I always try to impress upon clients is make sure you're clear about what your metrics are measuring. Are we looking at staffed room utilization? Are we looking at facility room utilization? Are we looking at block utilization? All of those numbers can be different. Utilization of blocks is, I've blocked out 50% of my ORs and we're at 90% utilization. And then people say, we need to open up more rooms. We're at 90% block utilization. We need more capacity, but yet our OR utilization, our staffed OR utilization is only at 60%. Why would you add more rooms when you've got that much capacity left over? Are we looking at day shift utilization? Are we looking at prime hours, which tend to go until about 5? Are we looking at total staffed utilization? And as everybody knows who's ever been in an operating room, once you get to about 30 or 40% utilization in the middle of the night, everything feels full. So and utilization, the other side of it is, as every surgeon knows, you want to improve your block utilization? Slow down. Make that 1 hour case last 3 hours and suddenly your utilization looks great. The reward for being really efficient is, I'm going to take away your block time. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that from surgeons. But again, it isn't just looking at utilization of anything. That's never going to be the magic number. There's never any one magic number to look at. For many, many years, we talked about FCOTS, first case on time start percentage. Then it was like, well, okay, what's a first case? Is it the first case in each room? Is it any case starting at 7:30? What's our definition? Nobody ever really defined what that meant. And it's like, are we going to use a window? No, it's going to be right on time. Okay, so if the patient isn't in the room at exactly 7:30, it's not an on-time start. Well, what if they were 7:20? 7:25. What if they're early? Then people say, well, maybe it's on time or early. Okay, well, guess what? When people started being held accountable to that, it was like, just get the patient in the room. We'll finish preparing them in the room. We'll extend the case time. We'll take longer to get to incision, but at least our FCOTs will look good. People in surgery are really, really smart people. You give them a number and you hold them to it and you make them accountable for that one number, they will make sure it looks good. And it could be at the cost of everything else. So what we saw with, a lot of emphasis on first case on time starts, what we saw was patient into incision started getting longer and longer as activities got moved from the pre-op to being done in the room. So is that good? Surgeons didn't think so, because what that did is now that increased surgeon turnover time, which is another magic number, turnover. Well, surgeons look at turnover from close until next incision. Nursing looks at turnover as from cleanup end to setup start. Most administrators look at turnover as patient out to next patient in. So everybody's got a different definition, which is why a surgeon will be saying, turnovers here take 2 hours. And nursing will say, our turnovers are 12 minutes. They're using different definitions. So when it comes to metrics that matter, what's absolutely critical is we clearly define what that metric is and that everybody understands how they fit into that definition, because everyone's going to be looking at every single metric a little bit differently. Anesthesia, they've got their own definitions of turnover and utilization. They can be saying, we're 95% utilized, but we shut down the operating room for 17 hours last month because we had to go up to OB to do an epidural or do a C-section, and our providers were fully utilized. They were generating units, but we shut down an operating room and left a full team sitting there twiddling their thumbs because anesthesia was somewhere else. So again, be careful how we define things and we take a look at it. What we have found works really, really well is, and I know it's a bit trite, but balanced scorecard of metrics, looking at room turnover, looking at surgeon turnover, looking at staff utilization, looking at block utilization, all of these things laid out in a format so that we can set targets that are in balance with each other and not just focused on one specific number. That's how we found that improves the productivity of the operating room. It improves the effectiveness of the surgical program, and it works far, far better than focusing on one single number in any area. So that's what we've always recommended to our clients, is to lay out a set of metrics that make sense, that focus on where you want improvements, and to look at how they balance with each other. And don't just let this intense focus on one number make the rest of the program much, much worse.
The balanced scorecard is a great way to think about that, and it's actually giving me business school flashbacks. But it's a great point to bring up, and incredibly important for modern perioperative suites. In talking about developing that card, what are some recommended efficiency metrics that are used in surgical services that you find to be underutilized by hospital systems before we get there?
Well, first of all, I will tell you that one term that gets abused so much is efficiency. Everybody will talk about what is the most efficient, but nobody ever says they're looking at efficiency only from their standpoint. We tend to look at efficiency as, how do we get rid of waste in the system? So when I look at the throughput of a patient, where are there areas that we are spending time, spending resources, and not getting any value from them as it relates to the throughput of the patient? So things like, all of our patients get here 3 hours before their scheduled start time. Well, it'll reduce waiting if a case gets canceled. It will help that surgeon become more productive, because they're not going to wait around for another patient to come in because somebody got canceled at the last minute by anesthesia. But it's incredibly inefficient, because now I've got all of these, I'm going to have all these nurses in the pre-op area taking care of these patients. It's not creating any value. It's destroying patient satisfaction. It's driving a facility that will have twice as many beds as it needs, because I've got all of these people coming in at 5 a.m. So is that efficient? No. It might make a surgeon more productive in an adverse situation where a case gets canceled. And rather than waiting around for 15 or 20 minutes for the next patient, there's a patient right there ready to go. The 2-room conundrum. A surgeon wants 2 rooms and 2 teams because that will make them more efficient. Well, and it does. It makes them more efficient because they have less waste and less waiting time when they can go from one room to the next and go right to work and not have to wait on anything. But unless it's a very clear-cut case, and only certain cases really lend themselves to 2 rooms or 2 teams, what ends up happening is I take each of those teams and I drop about 35 to 40% of their utilization and productivity right off the gate, because they're waiting for the surgeon. If I'm going to offer 2 rooms, I need to make sure that I look at total case time, and that's from setup start to cleanup end. My incision to close should be about 50% of that total case time. If it's 70%, then I'm going to see anesthesia and nursing waiting around, and for those that surgeon going back and forth. If skin incision to close is 30% of the total case time, then I'm going to be waiting on the surgeon because the rest of the case is going to take up too much time. With 2 rooms, that 50% is a magic number to look at, because if it's not there, it's going to cost me somewhere else. And what will then happen is I've given a surgeon 2 rooms and 2 teams to do 5 cases when a surgeon using each room could have given me 4 cases in each room. So my productivity has gone from 8 cases in 2 rooms down to 5. That is never a good number. So those are the kinds of things that we see as we move through the process and talking about what's efficient, what's not efficient. We need to be looking at balancing productivity, which is how much output do I get for the input, versus efficiency, which is how much of my time is generating value minus that isn't generating value as it relates to the patient throughput journey. And that's where a lot of people get confused around those terms.
Yeah, it's totally understandable that there's confusion around those. Excuse me. And especially looking up at the C-suite level, because that's really the highest level that we interact with commonly. I feel like there's a difference in types of metrics, and some I call vanity metrics, and they're those that are very high level, seem like they would tell a significant story, like you were mentioning. And then the other side of that is the more operationally meaningful metrics. Vanity metrics, we've talked about first case on time start, we've talked total number of cases per day for that C-suite leader to evaluate the performance of their OR. What I've noticed we tend to do is get more in depth with the operationally meaningful metrics. And some C-suites just are not as data driven as others. How do you, as a very senior consultant, come in and encourage that data literacy at the C-suite level, or help them understand the difference between what's a vanity metric and what really is a metric that creates meaningful difference in their organization when it comes to building out that balanced scorecard?
I like that term, vanity metrics. I've never used that or heard that before, so that's a good one. Even some metrics that some people would consider to be vanity metrics can be very, very important, as well as they can have some disastrous consequences. I mean, an anecdote. There was a hospital that was very focused. It was a section of a bigger hospital, but it was a heart program, and it was very, very focused on cardiac surgery. So every room had a perfusionist, every room had a cardiac team. They had cardiac anesthesia for every room. And the system put in a great program for their managers. If you can grow volume, we're going to give you a big bonus. So the director perioperative for this heart hospital said, wow, this is a great idea. I'm going to grow volume. Well, I've got 100% market share of all the cardiac surgeons. I'm not going to grow volume there, but there's these podiatrists that really are trying to get OR time at the other hospital, and they can't get time. I'm going to give them time because I'm only at 50% utilization. So he brought a bunch of podiatry in. He added, I think, 1,500 cases a year in a very short period of time, and he got a big bonus. But think about the cost of these simple outpatient cases when there's a perfusionist sitting around doing nothing. There's a cardiac anesthesiologist, one of the most expensive resources that you can find, and right now the going rate for a cardiac anesthesiologist is around $900,000 a year. So you've got that resource sitting around doing nothing. You've got this cardiac team of nurses and techs with, a PA or first assist, all of them sitting around watching us do a bunionectomy that isn't going to pay anywhere close to what it's costing us. But that was the metric that the manager was evaluated on, and they did the rational thing, and they raised it as much as they could. So again, volume, you could look at volume per room as a vanity metric, but it can have some disastrous consequences. So when I look at room efficiency, how well am I making those cases? How well am I using the room once I get in there? I can talk about overall averages all day long, but you're never going to make a meaningful change in an operating room based upon an average. So if I go to a surgeon and say, your cases take longer than your peers, I can guarantee you what the response will be. My patients are sicker than everybody else's, and they take more time. I cannot tell you how many thousands of surgeons I've interviewed in my career, and I've never heard two things. Number one, I've never heard that turnover is too short in this hospital. And number two, I've never heard a surgeon say, my patients are healthier than everybody else's. You have to be aware of that. So what you do when you want to make meaningful change using data is you come back to them and say, here is your time for a lap chole. And here's how your lap chole compares to the other lap choles that are done in this hospital. And here's how your lap choles compare to this national database of 200,000 or 300,000 lap choles. And here's how it looks stratified by ASA class. And guess what? By every cut of this data, you're taking longer than your peers. What can we do to help you reduce waste in your case time? Is it something as simple as, well, they get the patient already, and then the CRNA pages the anesthesiologist to come in for induction? Okay, we can work on that. We know that that's a practice that we can do differently that will reduce case time. Is it we get everything draped, prepped, everything else, and then we page you, and then you come in? Well, we can figure out a way to reduce that. And how do we get you into the room sooner? When do we make that phone call farther in advance? All of these things you can look at and say, there's different ways of doing it that will help us reduce case time, reduce all of these segments of the case to reduce the waste for everybody in the room and not just the surgeon. But how do we make sure that that scrub tech and circulator aren't just sitting around waiting for somebody else? How do we make sure that that anesthesiology provider is not sitting around waiting for something else to happen as we move through the process? Are there ways that we can be doing things in parallel to reduce the time the patient is in the room so that we can get more cases done in that room to help reduce either backlog or surgeon access or anything else that's really being driven by a need to get into those ORs?
Those are all great points. And talking about data in terms of an organization's culture, I've observed in a few different systems that they lean so heavily into the data centric management of things. It almost becomes like a gotcha culture where if you aren't below this time for your patient turnover, you don't get a gold star that day or you get a nasty gram. How do you balance, or how would you recommend an organization balance their data consciousness without becoming that gotcha culture that makes everything have to be a NASCAR pit crew, potentially at the expense of patient safety?
Well, using that pit crew example is really accurate. When you're a pit crew, there are no opportunities for something to go south. I mean, you don't ever want that to happen. If you do, you're out of the race, you're done, it's over. As much as we like to think that surgery can be a factory, as much as we like to think that there is never variation in surgery, it's not true. We're dealing with patients, we are dealing with people, and sometimes things just happen. Everybody who's ever worked in the operating room knows the patient. You get them on the table, and then they say, I really have to go to the bathroom. It's like, okay, let's stop and take the patient to the bathroom. And, we'll take the IV pole and do all this. And suddenly we've added 10 minutes. Was that in the control of anybody? Probably not, because I am sure that pre-op nurse asked that patient, do you need to go to the bathroom before we go back to the room? And they The patient probably said no, but it happened. Oh, we've all seen the surgery that is sad as it is. The surgeon gets in there and finds out that that cancer is so widespread and so bad that there really isn't anything they can do. And what was supposed to be a 4-hour surgery is now done in 35 minutes. Do we penalize somebody for that? No. There needs to be some common sense that's applied to data. We need to be, when we look at things, you can't always use averages. Sometimes you have to get down to specific, like we were talking about case times. Let's talk about this case time for a specific procedure and not just turnovers in general. You want me to improve productivity? Well, I'm going to make sure that I bring every single Ditzel case into that OR so I can get 12 or 13 cases done in a day. Now, is that helping me? Is that helping generate a profit for the hospital? Is that helping me take care of patients that are critically ill? No, but it's helping my productivity. So temper that data. Data is not a hammer. It's not a something to beat people up with. And it just has to be looked at as, here's a tool. It's a piece of information. It's a lot like that EKG or that X-ray to the surgeon. It's a piece of data that is helping you tell the entire picture of this patient, of this process, but it's not the end all. And everybody who's ever worked in an operating room can give you a whole laundry list of things that happened to cause the numbers to not look good, that was not within the control of anybody in the entire process. And to get beat up for that is, as you said, it's either going to say, I'm just going to push it through. And I don't care about patient safety. I don't care about patient satisfaction. I just care about not getting yelled at. Wrong attitude. Or it's going to be, we take so much time to make sure everything is right that we delay cases, we cancel cases, and that's just as bad as the other option. So much of it is just use common sense. It really gets back to the governance structure. It's like, it's the surgeon that says, okay, this month you had 20% block utilization. It's like, yeah, here are 4 cases that all didn't happen through no fault of mine. Okay, great. Let's try to get our block utilization back up to that 80%. We understand no one's going to get gigged because your block utilization is low this month. And those are the kinds of things that a good, effective, engaged governance structure is going to know how to do without any coaching, and it'll just be second nature to them.
Yeah, what you're talking about is called data stewardship, and it's really where the human side of all these ones and zeros comes into play. And I feel like a lot of what I've done in my time at Sullivan is work with those frontline surgical services leaders, be it OR directors, charge nurses, even in some cases, PECs or SECs, to really understand the second and third layers of detail within data. Our room concurrency chart is a great example of that, where at first glance, it may look as if a portion of the end of the day isn't used. But in reality, the reason that portion of the day isn't used is because your OR leaders are preparing for cases to run beyond coverage later in the day and are trying to minimize the amount of rooms that are running that way. It's really important, especially with what we do, to be able to have those conversations and break it down to a very informative level and explain how to leverage that information to effectively lead their ORs. And it's something I have an absolute blast doing. Looking at the future, I know
you're just trying to get me on record saying you've done a great job. Is that it?
No, I know I've done a great job. You don't have to say it. Looking at the future, there's been a huge change in the last 2 to 3 years. And please, if you don't feel comfortable answering this, don't worry about it because it's very new information. But looking at AI being put into advanced analytics and things that we've used it for, and benchmarking tools becoming more available in their EMRs, Epic, for example, has a great set of reports built right into it that can be customized for each organization. What do you see as the next generation of perioperative metrics looking like? Because correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry loves to tell the story of when you were a consultant in the 80s with him, you would come in with giant rolls of like butcher paper and things drawn all over them. And that was the current version of mix. I imagine there was a dot matrix printer involved somewhere. So you've really seen metrics change over the last, millennia that you've been in consulting. Where do you see it going?
So, in terms of AI and surgery, where I see AI having the biggest impact over the next couple of years is really in terms of improving the accuracy of the schedule. Right now, and you can look at Epic, you can look at Cerner, you can look at Meditech. Surgeon puts a case on, they say, I'm going to do a lap chole, and that's it. And it's really up to kind of PAT to be looking at the patient, looking at the chart, saying what's going on. Oh, this patient is morbidly obese. They've got 5 different comorbidities. They've got this. They've got a history of malignant hypertension. All of these things that will really affect how long that case should be in the room are all there on the chart. And hospitals that have great pre-anesthesia screening programs, they'll note all of that. They'll look at it. They'll talk about it in the huddle. Everybody will be ready for it. But you know what nobody ever does is go back and say, we need to give this case more time. This isn't going to be a 1-hour case. It's going to be in that room for 3 hours. And I think one of the things that AI will help us do is when we book that case, the AI will be able to scan the chart, identify those things that are going to impact how long the case will take, what resources that case will take, and start putting them onto the schedule so that we see them farther in advance, adjusting the schedule time, those sorts of things, so that the schedule becomes more accurate based upon the conditions of each individual patient. Years ago, early in my career, I did a lot of work with one of the OR information companies that basically doesn't exist anymore, but we developed an incredible algorithm for predicting case length. And it was a fairly extensive regression analysis that looked at things like resident involvement, ASA class, BMI, 8 or 10 other factors. And we got to be pretty good at predicting how long a case would take. The problem was it was so onerous to do that people might run the algorithm once and never use it again. AI is going to give us the opportunity to do that kind of algorithm in real time. And so as we book the case, scanning the thing, and instead of coming back with, well, here's your Olympic average of the last 12 cases with the high and the low thrown out, it's going to come back and say, we predict that this case is going to take 87 minutes from cleanup or setup start to cleanup end. And we're going to get a much better schedule because of it. And I think that's where the biggest impact in the short term will be of AI. And at that point, we can start then moving into using AI to develop literally equipment schedules. Okay, based upon the cases that are on the schedule, here is the journey that the C-arm and the X-ray tech are going to have to take over the course of the day. And they're going to be in this room for 18 minutes. They're going to be in that room for 22 minutes. They're going to be in this room for 45 minutes. And this will be their entire day. And we will have an entire path plotted out for them, thanks to the ability of AI to scan all of these different variables and look at things in a different, that we could do with a very experienced OR coordinator, but it will also be able to balance that against all of the other factors that just makes it too complex for a human to look at on a daily basis. So those are the key things. In terms of metrics that we want to be looking at, I think you're really going to see more and more emphasis on how well are we using room time? How well are we adapting to our standard work? I mean, we know, for example, that room turnover can be significantly impacted by putting in standard work that identifies what everybody should be doing when. And right now we do all that by hand and through observations, but AI will help us be doing that and start notifying people that, hey, you need to be in room 7 in 3 minutes because you're going to be required to do X. And then communicating that out of where everybody will be needed and how do we take that room turnover time and get it down to 17, 18 minutes on average from our current national average of about 33 minutes. And those are the areas where I see AI impacting surgery the most in the relatively near future.
Yeah, I'll be looking forward to the day where that the predictive scheduling based off chart awareness comes into play, because that'll be groundbreaking for a lot of organizations and really simplify things for schedulers who in most cases have non-clinical backgrounds. So it's really going to be a game changer when it comes to efficiency and utilization.
Absolutely.
As we look towards wrapping this up, in concert with our podcast title, The Perioperative Playbook, I would love for you to tell me a play out of your playbook by giving me your top 5 metrics that you think are critical to a well-run surgical suite.
Top 5.
Top 5.
That's going to be, let's see, that'll be a tough one. I would probably look at first staffed room utilization during elective hours. And that could be, 7 to 3, 7 to 5, 7 to 7, whatever those electively scheduled hours are. I'd be looking at room utilization. I would be looking at first case on time starts defined based on the first case scheduled in each room, and I would probably give it an on time or plus 5 minutes window. And I would shoot for that to be, greater than 95%. I would look at block utilization, and I would want anybody who has a block to be using it at 80% or more. And that would be for total case time, including a reasonable turnover. I would be looking at a metric of schedule volatility, which is what is my percentage of cases that happened at the time and place that they were originally scheduled to occur. So if I scheduled 500 cases and 400 of them got moved or canceled or changed, then I have a 75% schedule volatility index. I want that volatility to be as close to 0 as possible. So that's a good number. And finally, number 5, I would look at average turnover time for outpatient cases, for inpatient cases, and for the very complex cases. So those are the top 5 metrics in my playbook.
I gotta say, I like the volatility one. That's a good one to have.
It's a very tough one to calculate.
Yeah.
None of the systems do it. Some of the systems, depending on how they're set up, don't even capture the data so that you can do it manually.
Well, thankfully, we don't need a system to calculate that. We have a Bob Dively, so we're in good shape. And even though no one asked for it, a play out of my playbook in terms of this for leaders relying or looking at data. You don't have to pronounce the acronym. I don't know what it is, but saying words like WUPUS for worked hours per unit of service, or people calling first case on time starts FCOTUS, you don't have to do that.
I've always called it
I don't think you do that.
I call it
Yeah.
FCOTS.
I don't know if it's the Army scar tissue that everyone is just determined to make pronounceable acronyms, but you just don't have to. And I just
No,
want people to know that.
FCOTS is the only one I will use a word for.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. But we have some people that are constantly talking about WUPUS. I'm just like, I can't say it. I can't bring myself to say it.
I will never use that word.
I haven't heard you do it before, so I figured you felt the same way. To everyone listening, Randy, anything you'd like to talk about that I've missed?
I want to bring up one last topic. It's a little bit off the subject.
Sure.
But it really plays to the name of this podcast, and it's the Perioperative Playbook. And you might be a little bit young. No, you're a lot young, but Vince Lombardi gave a great speech before one of his Super Bowl appearances, and somebody recorded it or taped it. And I remember seeing it on TV when I was young. And it was like, what people don't understand about winning is it's not the playbook. I will be more than happy to give my playbook to any of my competitors. The reason we win is that we execute better than anyone. We focus on the details. We focus on the blocking, the tackling, the basics, and we out execute everyone. And I think one of the reasons for this podcast is we've got a great playbook at Sullivan. We've been doing this in surgery since 1977. We have a phenomenal playbook, and we're giving it to everyone so that they can execute as well as our clients do. And we're always available to help with that execution. But it isn't the playbook. It's the execution. It's the basics. And that's what we help our clients with every single day.
I love that you brought that up. And while I am a little younger than Vince Lombardi, I am a rabid Packers fan. And my favorite Lombardi quote is perfection is not attainable. But if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And I love being here for our clients. I enjoy what I do and get genuinely excited to talk about anything related to perioperative services. So if anyone listening has questions or wants to engage, please email us at info@sullivanhealthcareconsulting.com. We'll get to you right away. We're excited to help out and excited to contribute. And Randy, I can't thank you enough for coming by today and spending some time having a conversation with me. And I'm looking forward to the next one already.
All right. Happy to do it. Thank you very much.